I stood behind the heavy oak door and gripped the wool scarf my husband always called cheap. Inside, he laughed and told his wealthy friends that I was just a reliable compact car compared to his ex, the Ferrari. He had no idea the woman shivering in the hallway actually owned the designer dress he was praising on her. Tonight. The snow outside would not be the only thing freezing over. My name is Harper Sterling. Although for the past 12 months, the people inside this mansion have known me only as Harper, the quiet library archivist who probably shops at thrift stores. I am 28 years old, and tonight I stood frozen in the dimly lit corridor of the Winterbourne estate, pressing my back against the cold wainscoting. The heavy oak door to the cigar room was slightly ajar, just enough for the thick, pungent scent of expensive tobacco to drift out and choke the crisp winter air. It was the night before Christmas, and the house was decorated with garlands that cost more than my supposed annual salary, but the warmth of the holiday did not reach where I stood. I had come to find my husband, Julian Thorne, to tell him I had arrived, but the sound of his laughter stopped me dead in my tracks. It was a cruel, braying sound I had never heard when we were alone. Come on, Julian, admit it. A voice I recognized as his college friend taunted. You brought the librarian tonight with Isabella coming. Then I heard Julian's voice, smooth and arrogant, drifting through the crack in the door. Look, Harper is functional. You know, like a Honda Civic. Dependable. Boring. But Isabella is a Ferrari. She is the kind of ride every man dreams of handling. The roar of masculine laughter that followed felt like a physical slap. I gripped the wool scarf around my neck, the very one Julian had looked at with disdain earlier that evening, calling it quaint. So why marry the Civic? Another voice asked. Strategy, Julian replied, the clink of ice against crystal punctuating his words. Investors love a family man. Harper makes me look grounded, stable. I need that image right now, but let's be real. Apex Horizon is bleeding cash. I need a capital injection. And Isabella's father is the only one with pockets deep enough to save us. Tonight is about rekindling old alliances. Once the money is secured, well, I can upgrade my vehicle. The cold that washed over me had nothing to do with the snow piling up against the window panes. It seeped from my chest outward, freezing my blood. I suddenly understood everything. The way he critiqued how I held a wine glass, the way he sighed when I wore comfortable shoes instead of heels. I had thought he was trying to help me fit into his world. I was wrong. It was just contempt. I turned away from the door, my heels silent on the plush carpet, and walked back toward the main dining hall. The scene that greeted me there was no warmer. My mother-in-law, Victoria Thorne, was standing at the head of the long mahogany table, directing the house staff with a sharp, manicured finger. No, not there. Victoria snapped at a young maid. Move that setting to the end. The far end. Near the kitchen service door. But madam, the maid hesitated, holding my place card. This is Mrs. Thorne's seat. Next to Mr. Julian. Isabella is joining us tonight, Victoria declared, her voice devoid of any warmth. She sits at the place of honor next to my son. Harper will understand. Or she won't. It hardly matters. I watched from the archway as my identity was physically shoved to the margins of the room. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, hot and sudden, but I forced them back. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine and betrayal, and felt a strange calm settle over me. It was the same calm my father, the late chairman of Sterling Industries, always had before he closed a deal. I could hear his voice in my head, clear as a bell. Harper, never reveal your hand until they have bet everything. Let them think they have won right before you take the table. I turned on my heel and walked into the guest powder room, locking the door behind me. I turned on the faucet and splashed freezing cold water onto my face. I looked up into the gilded mirror. The woman staring back at me looked tired and small. but the eyes were sharp. The Cinderella act ended tonight. I reached into my worn leather handbag and pulled out my phone. The screen was cracked, a deliberate prop I had maintained for months to sell the image of my poverty. But when I pressed my thumb against the center of the shattered glass, a hidden interface glowed to life. It was a biometric security app, one that bypassed the standard operating system entirely. I watched as the screen loaded, connecting directly to the private server of the Sterling Family Trust. The numbers on the screen were not the $300 Julian thought I had in my savings. They were figures that could buy this entire estate 10 times over. I tapped the screen, opening the file labeled Thorn Debt Acquisition, and whispered to my reflection, "Merry Christmas, Julian." It is funny how quickly a mask slips when money is on the table. When I first met Julian 2 years ago, I was desperate to escape the suffocating weight of my inheritance. Being the sole heir to the Sterling Industries empire meant that every man I met looked at me and saw a walking bank account. I wanted to be loved for myself, so I became Harper the librarian, a woman who clipped coupons and drove a beat-up car. Julian had played his part perfectly back then. He wore off-the-rack suits and talked about building something real. What a joke. But here, under the crystal chandeliers of Winterbourne, the air reeked of desperate, clawing ambition. The double doors swung open, and the room seemed to suck in its breath. Isabella stood there, draped in a shimmering silver gown that I recognized immediately. It was a custom piece from the new Parisian collection, worth more than most people earned in a year. She looked like a trophy, which was exactly what Julian wanted. He abandoned me by the punch bowl without a second glance. I watched him rush across the room, his smile stretching so wide it looked painful. "Isabella," Julian announced, loud enough for the investors in the corner to hear. "Now this is what I call an entrance. You look absolutely breathtaking." He took her hand and led her toward the center of the room, stopping right in front of me as if I were invisible. He gestured to her dress and then flicked a dismissive hand toward my simple black attire. "You see, everyone," Julian boomed, his arm around Isabella's waist. "This is what class looks like. It is bold. It commands attention. Harper, darling, take notes. Maybe Isabella can give you the number of her stylist, though I doubt you could afford the consultation fee." The guests chuckled nervously. I just sipped my water, tasting the bitterness of reality. Then came the gift exchange. I had spent 3 months knitting a scarf for Victoria, using the finest cashmere yarn I could find. It was soft, warm, and made with genuine care. I handed the wrapped box to her with a shy smile. Victoria tore open the paper, lifted the gray fabric with 2 fingers as if it were a dead rodent, and let it drop onto a side table. "Oh," she said, her lip curling. "It is homemade. How quaint. I suppose it will make a decent dust rag for the servants." Before I could speak, Isabella stepped forward and handed Victoria a sleek, green velvet box. Victoria opened it to reveal a gold Rolex studded with diamonds. She gasped, her eyes lighting up with the same greed I saw in her son. "Now this," Victoria exclaimed, clasping the watch to her chest, "is a gift from someone who understands our family's stature. Thank you, Isabella. You truly belong here." I watched them fawn over the watch, but my mind was working on a different track. Julian was sweating. I noticed the sheen on his forehead despite the cool room. He was pouring wine with a shaking hand. A man does not humiliate his wife to impress an ex-girlfriend unless he is terrified. He needed Isabella not for love, but for a lifeline. I saw my chance when Julian guided Isabella to the balcony to show her the view. I slipped into his private study and closed the door softly. The desk was a chaotic mess of papers, a stark contrast to the organized image he projected. I began sifting through them. My eyes widened. Final notice. Overdue. Threat of seizure. Julian was not just struggling, he was drowning. His investment firm, Apex Horizon, was a hollow shell. He had leveraged everything, including this mansion, to cover bad bets on the futures market. He owed millions. I picked up a document stamped with red ink. It was a foreclosure warning from the primary lender holding the mortgage on the Winterbourne estate. I scanned the letterhead, and my heart stopped for a second before starting again with a slow, heavy rhythm. The lender was First City Merchant Bank. A dry, humorless smile touched my lips. Julian was so obsessed with status that he never bothered to check who actually owned the institutions he borrowed from. First City Merchant Bank was a subsidiary I had acquired aggressively 3 years ago. It was a small asset in the Sterling portfolio, one I barely thought about until now. I was not just his wife, I was his creditor. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of my personal attorney, ignoring the late hour. "Richard," I said the moment he answered, "I need you to pull the file on the Thorne family debt. Specifically, the mortgage on the Winterbourne estate and the business loans for Apex Horizon. Mrs. Sterling." Richard's voice was groggy but instantly alert. "That is a conflict of interest if you are looking to bail them out." "No, Richard," I whispered, looking at the door as I heard Julian's laughter from the hall. "I do not want to bail them out. I want to buy the debt personally, expedite the transfer. I want to own every single cent he owes by tomorrow morning. Consider it a Christmas gift to myself." The party upstairs was a roar of fake laughter and clinking crystal, but down here in the service corridors, the silence was heavy. Victoria had banished me from the festivities with a wave of her hand, commanding me to fetch more vintage Merlot from the reserve cellar as if I were a hired waitress rather than her daughter-in-law. "And do not take all night. Harper," she had hissed, "we have important guests." I navigated the stone hallway that connected the wine cellar to the west wing, a section of the manor that had fallen into disrepair. It was here that the family kept Julian's grandmother, Eleanor Thorne. They told everyone she was senile, a tragic case of dementia best kept out of sight. I pushed open the heavy wooden door to her sitting room, expecting to find a confused old woman. Instead, I found her slumped in a velvet armchair, a half-empty bottle of pills on the table beside a cold cup of tea. I picked up the bottle. The label said vitamins, but the pills inside were blue. I recognized them immediately. They were heavy sedatives. "They are drugging you," I whispered to the empty room. I quickly went to the small kitchenette in the corner, boiled fresh water, and brewed a strong cup of black tea. I found a bottle of saline solution in my purse, a habit from my days traveling in unpredictable climates, and flushed the sedatives down the sink, replacing them with harmless sugar tablets I kept for low blood sugar. I returned to the armchair and gently shook her shoulder. "Eleanor, wake up. Please, you need to drink this." Her eyelids fluttered. She looked at me, her gaze cloudy at first, then sharpening with terrifying speed as the tea warmed her system. She sat up straighter, the fog of the drugs lifting. She studied my face, her eyes narrowing not with confusion, but with recognition. "You—" Eleanor's voice was raspy but firm. "You are the girl Julian married, the quiet one, but you do not hold yourself like a mouse when no one is watching. You stand like a queen." "I am not who they think I am," I said softly, handing her the tea. "Good," she replied, taking a sip. "Because if you were just a librarian, we would both be doomed." "Victoria keeps me sedated so I cannot stop them. Julian, he is selling everything. He thinks I do not know. He is in debt, Eleanor. Deep debt. It is worse than debt," she hissed, her hand gripping my wrist with surprising strength. "He forged my signature. He leveraged the family trust, the last unblemished asset we have to fund a joint venture with Isabella's father. If that deal fails, the legacy my husband built is gone." I looked at this woman, frail but fierce, and saw a kindred spirit. I decided then and there to drop the veil. "My name is Harper Sterling," I said, my voice steady. "My father was Arthur Sterling. I have the resources to stop them, but I need proof of his fraud." Eleanor's eyes widened, and a slow, Conspiratorial smile spread across her face. Sterling, the tech empire. Oh, you are a dangerous woman. Harper, I like it. Go to the safe behind the portrait of the hunt in the study. The combination is my birthday. 08241942. I left her with a promise to return and slipped into Julian's study through the servant's entrance. The room was empty. I moved the painting and spun the dial. The heavy steel door clicked open. I did not pull out a notepad. Instead, I opened my compact powder case. Inside was not makeup, but a high-resolution microscanner disguised as a mirror. I scanned page after page of financial documents, the device uploading them instantly to my secure cloud server. Then I froze. At the bottom of the stack was a loan agreement for $3 million from a predatory lender known for violent collections. Julian's name was on the borrower line, but on the line for the guarantor, the person liable if he defaulted, was a signature that made my blood turn to ice. It was my name, Harper Sterling. He knew, or at least, he suspected I had credit, and he had stolen my identity to secure a junk loan. He had set me up as his fall guy. If his company collapsed, the debt would not hit him, it would hit me. He was not just using me as a placeholder, he was using me as a human shield. You, I whispered, the word hanging in the air. You did not just marry me for stability. You married me to be your scapegoat. I closed the safe and replaced the painting. The hurt I had felt earlier evaporated, replaced by a cold, metallic resolve. I was done being the sad, neglected wife. Julian Thorne was not just going to lose his wife tonight. He was going to lose his career, his reputation, and his freedom. I tapped my earpiece, connecting to my legal team. I have the documents. Execute the hostile takeover of Apex Horizon immediately, and prepare the fraud dossier for the district attorney. We are going to war. The morning sun filtered through the dense pine forest surrounding the Winterbourne estate, casting long, fractured shadows on the snow. It was 9 in the morning, and the air was crisp, but my skin felt clammy under the layers of my rented ski suit. A photographer, hired by Julian to capture our idyllic holiday morning for a business lifestyle magazine, circled us like a vulture. Chin up, Harper. Look at your husband with adoration, the photographer shouted, his camera shutter clicking rapidly. Julian gripped my waist, his fingers digging into my side hard enough to bruise. He leaned in close, his breath forming a cloud in the cold air, and whispered against my ear. Stop slouching. You look like a frightened deer. Isabella would know how to catch the light. She knows how to project power. You just project exhaustion. I am trying, Julian, I whispered back, forcing a stiff smile. Try harder, he hissed. My investors read this magazine. He steered me toward a wooden bench, clearing the snow with a dramatic sweep of his gloved hand before motioning for me to sit. He pulled a thick leather folder from his jacket. All right, take 5, Julian called out to the photographer. Just need to sign some boring domestic paperwork. As the photographer retreated to change his lens, Julian dropped the folder onto my lap. It is just marriage insurance, he said, his voice dropping to a casual, almost bored tone. Standard procedure for high net worth individuals. It protects you in case anything happens to the market. Just sign at the bottom. I opened the folder. The text was dense, filled with legal jargon, but I spotted the keywords immediately. Guarantor, full liability, asset seizure. This was not insurance. This was a transfer of debt. He was trying to assign his personal bankruptcy to me. I widened my eyes, feigning confusion, and tapped a paragraph with my gloved finger. Julian, what does irrevocable indemnification mean? It sounds so permanent. Should I call a lawyer? I do not want to do anything wrong. Julian let out a sharp, frustrated sigh and looked at his watch. God, Harper, do not be difficult. It is just legal noise. You just need to trust me. But this number here, I persisted, pointing to a liability cap of $5 million. $5 million. That is so much money. Is this safe? Just sign the damn paper, Julian snapped, his facade cracking. My God, your brain is simply not built for macro finance. Stick to your books and let the men handle the money. Sign it, or you are ruining this entire shoot. I shrank back, looking properly chastised. Okay, I am sorry. I will sign. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my own pen, a sleek, silver ballpoint. It was a piece of spy-grade technology I had acquired from a contact in Zurich. The ink was designed to oxidize and vanish completely within 2 hours of contact with paper. I signed my name, Harper Thorne, with a shaky hand. As I closed the folder, I fumbled, dropping it into the snow. Clumsy, Julian muttered, reaching down, but in that split second of clumsiness, my hand moved with the precision of a card shark. I slid the final page of the document out and replaced it with a sheet I had kept hidden in my sleeve. This new page was formatted identically to the others, but the text was different. It was a voting proxy form, transferring Julian's controlling interest in the family company to his wife, effective immediately upon execution. Julian snatched the folder up, checked for my signature, and smirked. He had no idea the signature would disappear by lunch, leaving only the voting transfer valid. There, he said, tucking the folder away. That was not so hard, was it? Well, a voice chimed in from the path. Isabella emerged from the trees, looking like a snow queen in white mink fur and designer boots. She walked right up to us, ignoring me completely to link her arm through Julian's. I saw the photographer leaving, she purred. I hope you got some good shots, though. She glanced down at my neon blue ski suit with a sneer. Where did you get that gear? Harper, the rental shack at the public park. It smells like mildew. Julian laughed, a cruel, barking sound. I told her to buy something nice, but you know Harper. She loves a bargain. I stood up, brushing the snow from my legs. The humiliation should have burned, but instead, I felt a cold, hard satisfaction. Enjoy the photos, Isabella, I said, my voice smooth and devoid of the stutter I usually faked. And enjoy him. You are holding on to a hollow corpse. But I suppose you two deserve each other. Isabella blinked, taken aback by my tone. But before she could respond, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A text from my assistant transaction confirmed. You are now the primary creditor for the Thorne Family Trust and Apex Horizon. We own 90% of his debt. A smile, genuine and sharp, cut across my face. I walked back toward the main house, leaving them in the woods. As I reached the patio, I saw Victoria pacing nervously with a glass of sherry. It was time to bait the trap. Victoria. I called out, breathless, waving my phone. Oh my God, I think I just won. Victoria looked at me with disdain. Won what? Be quiet, Harper. The lottery, I whispered, clutching my chest. I bought a ticket at the gas station yesterday. I just checked the numbers. It is $400,000. Victoria froze. Her eyes darted from my face to the phone, the disdain instantly replaced by a predatory gleam. The hook was set. Money has a distinct smell to people like Victoria and Julian Thorne. It acts like fresh blood in shark-infested waters. By the time lunch was served in the solarium, the news of my fabricated lottery win had circulated from the patio to the dining table. The transformation was grotesque and hilarious. Victoria, who had treated me like a servant just hours ago, was now piling truffle salad onto my plate with her own hands. Eat up, Harper dear, Victoria cooed, her eyes gleaming with calculation. You look so thin. We cannot have you looking frail when we celebrate later. Can we? Julian was even worse. He poured my sparkling water with the reverence usually reserved for holy water. He pulled his chair closer to mine, turning his back slightly on the empty seat prepared for Isabella, who was upstairs changing her outfit for the third time. You know, Julian started, his voice dripping with faux intimacy. I was thinking about what I said earlier, about Isabella. I took a slow bite of lettuce, suppressing a smirk. You said she was a Ferrari, Julian, and I was a Honda, a figure of speech. Julian laughed nervously, waving his hand. Look, Isabella is flashy. She is rich. Yes, but she is arrogant. She is cold. But you are real. You are the wife who knows how to share burdens and victories. That is why I love you. He placed his hand over mine. His palm was sweaty. The company is just going through a temporary cash flow hiccup. He continued, leaning in. This $400,000 you won. It is a sign. Harper, if you invested in Apex Horizon today, I can turn it into $4 million by next year. We can save the house. We can secure our future. I looked at him, widening my eyes in feigned innocence. Oh, Julian, I would love to help, but I feel so insecure with Isabella here. She acts like she owns the place. I pulled my hand away gently. If you want the money, you have to promise me something. Tonight, at the party. I want you to introduce me as your partner, not your silent partner, your equal. And I want you to tell Isabella that her father's money is not needed because your wife has saved the day. Julian flinched. The color drained from his face. He looked like a trapped rat. Harper, be reasonable, he stammered, glancing toward the door. Isabella she is a strategic partner. Her father is the Lion of Wall Street. We cannot just offend them. It is delicate. I need to keep her happy just a little longer. So you are using her. A sharp voice cut through the air. We both jumped. Eleanor walked into the solarium, leaning on her cane but moving with a vigor she had not possessed in years. She sat down opposite Julian, her eyes clear and mocking. Grandmother, Julian said, irritated. Go back to your room. This is business. It sounds like fraud, Eleanor retorted, picking up a breadstick and snapping it in half loudly. You tell Isabella you love her to get her father's millions. You tell Harper you love her to get her lottery scraps. Which is it, Julian? If your company is so successful, why are you begging your wife for her pocket money? Julian wiped his forehead with a napkin. You do not understand modern finance, Grandmother. It is about leveraging liquidity. I just need to bridge the gap until the quarterly returns come in boring, I muttered, sliding my hand under the table to check my phone. I had been recording the entire conversation. I am not using them, Julian snapped, his voice rising in panic. Fine, the truth. Isabella is a cow. She is a vain, empty-headed ATM machine. Once her father signs the check, I will dump her so fast her head will spin. And Harper is she is safe. But right now, I need Harper's cash to pay the interest so Isabella's dad does not see the red ink gotcha, I thought. I smiled sweetly at him. Okay, Julian, I will transfer the money tomorrow, but only if you promise everything will be okay. I promise, he exhaled. Looking relieved. You are saving us, Harper. Under the table, I pressed send. The audio file, titled The Truth About the Deal, flew across the digital network directly to the private email of Marcus Sterling, Isabella's father. He was a ruthless man who had built his empire on information, and he had always suspected Julian was a lightweight. 5 minutes later, Julian's phone rang. He looked at the screen and grinned. It is Marcus. He must be calling to finalize the investment. Julian put the phone on speaker, puffed out his chest, and answered. Marcus, Merry Christmas. We are so excited about tonight. Shut up. Julian. Marcus's voice boomed from the speaker. Cold as the grave. Julian froze. Marcus, is something wrong? I have been reviewing the risk assessment. Marcus lied smoothly. He had clearly heard the recording but was playing a deeper game. I am still willing to invest, but the terms have changed. I want collateral. Additional collateral. Personal assets. But, Julian stammered, I have already pledged the trust fund. I want the deed to the Winterbourne estate signed over to my holding company as security. Marcus demanded, tonight. Have the papers ready by 10 o'clock or the deal is dead. The call ended with a click. Julian dropped the phone onto the tablecloth. He looked at me, his eyes wide with terror. He did not own the deed anymore. He had already leveraged it to the bank that I secretly owned. He was being asked to pledge the same asset twice, which was a federal crime. This is great news, Julian. I clapped my hands, beaming. He still wants to invest. We just need to sign some papers. Julian looked like he was going to vomit. Yes, great news. The Grand Hall of Winterbourne was a kaleidoscope of velvet, silk, and hypocrisy. The air smelled of expensive imported orchids and the heavy, cloying perfume of old money trying too hard to stay relevant. It was Christmas Eve, the night Julian had promised to secure his legacy, but the room felt less like a celebration and more like a gladiatorial arena where status was the weapon of choice. I descended the main staircase wearing a black silk dress that reached the floor. To the untrained eyes of the Thorne family, it was plain, perhaps something bought off a clearance rack. They did not recognize the hand-stitching of the reclusive Italian atelier who only designed for a client list of 50 people worldwide. Around my neck, I wore a choker of icy white stones that caught the chandelier light with a brilliance that was almost blinding. Victoria intercepted me at the bottom of the stairs, a glass of champagne in one hand and a sneer on her lips. She grabbed my wrist, lifting my necklace for inspection before dropping it with a scoff. Oh, Harper, Victoria sighed, loud enough for the mayor's wife to hear. You really should not wear costume jewelry to an event like this. It reflects poorly on us. Those glass stones look like something from a holiday cracker. Julian joined us, adjusting his bow tie. He laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. Now, Mother, be kind. Harper likes her sparkles. It is endearing, like a child playing dress-up. He turned to the guests nearby. My wife prefers the simple things. Meanwhile, look at Isabella. He gestured to the entryway where Isabella was holding court, draped in pearls that looked heavy and dull compared to the fire around my neck. She saw us and glided over, sliding her arm through Julian's with practiced ease. Merry Christmas, Harper, Isabella said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. That dress is so sensible. And thank you, truly. You have been wonderful at keeping my seat warm for me while I was away, but I think I can take it from here. I did not flinch. I just smiled. A small, tight expression. Be careful. Isabella. Some seats are actually ejector chairs. Isabella laughed as if I had told a joke, and Julian led her away toward the stage. The lights dimmed, and a spotlight hit the podium. Julian stepped up, grabbing the microphone. Behind him, a massive projection screen lowered. Welcome, everyone, Julian boomed, his charisma turned up to maximum volume to hide the panic I knew was eating him alive. Tonight is about family. It is about the foundations we build, the future we secure. He clicked a remote, and a slideshow began. It was a montage of the Thorne family history, the estate, the ancestors, the parties. I watched as photo after photo flashed by. There were pictures of Julian, of Victoria, of his late father, and even several photos of Julian and Isabella from college. I was nowhere to be seen. In his version of the perfect family, I had already been erased. I stood in the shadows near a marble column, sipping my drink. I pulled my phone from my clutch. The screen showed a countdown, 21:59, in 1 minute. The global banking system would update. The acquisition of the Thorne family debt by Sterling Industries would be formally recorded, and the asset freeze I had authorized would trigger instantly. I looked across the room toward the DJ booth. Eleanor was sitting there in her wheelchair, looking like a harmless old woman enjoying the music. She caught my eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. She had successfully hacked the audio-visual feed. 2,200 hours. My phone vibrated. Executed. I set my glass down on a passing waiter's tray and walked toward the stage. The crowd parted for me, sensing the shift in my energy. I walked right up to the podium just as Julian was raising a toast to new partnerships. I stepped into the spotlight, standing so close to him that our shoulders touched. He looked down at me, annoyed, covering the mic with his hand. "What are you doing?" he hissed through his teeth. "Get off the stage. You are embarrassing me." I leaned in, my lips brushing his ear, and whispered with a voice that could have frozen the champagne in the glasses nearby. "You have compared me to her all week. Julian, you called me cheap. You called me a placeholder. You said I was a Honda and she was a Ferrari. Well, turn around. I am about to show you the real difference between us." Julian cleared his throat, regaining his composure as he turned back to the crowd. He raised his champagne glass high, oblivious to the fact that the projection screen behind him had flickered and changed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian announced, his voice booming with unearned confidence, "I am thrilled to announce a historic partnership between Apex Horizon and the Vance Family Trust. This union will secure our legacy for generations to come." A ripple of confused murmurs swept through the room. People were not looking at Julian. They were staring at the screen behind him. Julian frowned, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, and glanced over his shoulder. The heartwarming slideshow of his ancestors was gone. In its place was a high-definition projection of a bank statement dated this very morning. The header read, "Apex Horizon Corporate Account," and the balance was highlighted in bold, angry red ink. It did not show a profit. It showed a deficit of negative $12,450,000. "What is this?" Julian stammered, his hand shaking so hard champagne spilled onto his cuff. "Cut the feed! Somebody cut the feed!" He scrambled toward the laptop connected to the projector, frantically mashing buttons, but the system was locked out. Before he could pull the plug, the speakers crackled to life. It was not music. It was a voice recording, crystal clear and unmistakably his own, captured just hours ago in the solarium. "Isabella is a cow. She is a vain, empty-headed ATM machine. Once her father signs the check, I will dump her so fast her head will spin." The room gasped in unison. Julian froze, his face draining of color. But the recording continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "And Harper. Harper is just... She is safe. She is free help. I need her cash to pay the interest so Isabella's dad does not see the red ink." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Then, movement shattered the stillness. Isabella walked up the steps of the stage. Her face was not sad, it was twisted into a mask of pure, humiliated rage. She did not say a word. She wound up her arm and struck Julian across the face with such force that the sound echoed off the vaulted ceiling like a gunshot. "You," Isabella choked out, tears of fury welling in her eyes. "You cheap, lying bastard from the back of the room." Marcus Vance, Isabella's father, stood up. He did not yell. He simply buttoned his jacket and spoke with a volume that carried to every corner of the silent hall. "The deal is dead. Julian. And my lawyers will be contacting you regarding the fraud you attempted to perpetrate on my family." Julian stood holding his cheek, looking around wildly for an ally. His eyes landed on his mother. Victoria, sensing the collapse of her world, did exactly what I expected her to do. She turned on the weakest person in the room. She lunged at me. "You! Victoria shrieked, pointing a trembling finger in my face. You did this! You ungrateful little wretch, you ruined everything because you are jealous. You are nothing but a useless leech. You have lived off my son's charity for a year, and this is how you repay us. Get out! Get out of my house! I did not flinch. I did not step back. Instead, I reached out and took the microphone from Julian's limp hand. The feedback squealed for a split second before I steadied it. Actually, Victoria, I said, my voice calm, deep, and echoing through the speakers with an authority they had never heard from me before. I think it is time we corrected a few misconceptions. I stepped forward, commanding the stage. The guests stared at me, captivated by the sudden shift in my demeanor. The stutter, the hunched shoulders, the shyness it all evaporated. My name, I said, looking directly into the camera of a news crew that had been invited to cover the party, is not just Harper Thorne. My birth name is Harper Sterling. I am the sole heiress and current chairwoman of Sterling Industries. A collective gasp went through the room. The name Sterling was royalty in the business world. It meant power. It meant old, untouchable money. And regarding this house, I continued, turning to look at Julian, who was now trembling visibly. You do not own it anymore. Julian, my company purchased the mortgage note this afternoon. I am not your dependent. I am your landlord. And I am your biggest creditor. I saw Victoria's mouth open and close like a fish out of water. I smiled coldly and touched the diamond necklace at my throat, the one she had mocked earlier. And one last thing. Victoria, I said, my fingers tracing the cold stones. You called this costume jewelry. This is the Midnight Frost collection from Cartier. It was commissioned by my grandmother in 1955. It is currently valued at $3.5 million. That is roughly $1 million more than the current market value of this entire house you are standing in. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a predator entering a clearing. I looked at Julian. His face had gone from red to a ghostly, terrified white. He looked at me not as his wife, but as a mountain he had foolishly tried to climb without a rope. Merry Christmas, darling, I said into the microphone. I hope you kept the receipt for your ego, because you are going to need a refund. The heavy oak doors at the back of the hall swung open with a resounding thud that silenced the few remaining whispers. Richard, my chief legal counsel, strode into the room flanked by 4 private security officers and a team of paralegals. They moved with the synchronized precision of a military unit. Without a word, they began distributing thick, black-bound dossiers to the key shareholders, the board members of Apex Horizon, and the stunned members of the press. What is this? Julian gasped, his eyes darting between the files and my face. What are you handing them? Evidence, Julian, I said, my voice magnified by the speakers, cool and detached. Section 1 details how you used my social security number to secure high-risk loans without my consent. Section 2 contains the forensic analysis of your grandmother's signature on the trust fund liquidation documents. It is a forgery. And Section 3, that is the trail of the investor funds you embezzled to pay for your mistress's trips to Monaco. Julian lunged toward me, but a security guard stepped in his path, a wall of muscle in a dark suit. Julian stopped, his hands trembling as he reached out to me over the guard's shoulder. Harper! Wait, please! Julian cried out, sweat beading on his forehead. I did it for us. I did it for the family. You cannot destroy me like this. We are husband and wife. Does that mean nothing to you? Please, have some mercy for the sake of our vows. I looked down at him from the edge of the stage. The man who had mocked my walk, my clothes, and my existence was now begging for scraps. Mercy, I asked, tilting my head slightly. You spent this entire week comparing me to Isabella to lower my value. You measured me against her and found me lacking. Well, Julian, I have decided to use your method. I am comparing you to my standard for a husband and a business partner. And the result is, you failed. I can fix this, he pleaded, his voice cracking. I am still the CEO. I still have voting rights. Actually, you do not, I replied, gesturing to Richard, who held up a single sheet of paper encased in plastic. Do you remember that insurance document you made me sign in the woods this morning? The one you were too impatient to read. You were so busy insulting my intelligence that you did not notice I swapped the signature page. You did not sign an insurance waiver. Julian, you signed an irrevocable transfer of all your voting shares to me to satisfy your outstanding debt. Julian's knees buckled. He stared at the paper as if it were a death sentence. That is impossible, he whispered. It is legally binding, I stated flatly. As of this moment, I own 51% of Apex Horizon, and my first act as majority shareholder is to accept your resignation effective immediately. A shrill scream pierced the air. Victoria, realizing the gravity of the situation, clutched her chest. My house, she wailed, looking around wildly. You cannot take my house. I am a thorn. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed into the arms of a nearby waiter. It was a theatrical faint, perfectly timed, but no one moved to help her except the paid staff. The socialites and investors were too busy reading the dossiers, their faces twisting in disgust. I pulled my phone out and tapped the screen once. I have just issued a freeze on all accounts connected to Julian and Victoria Thorne pending a federal audit. I announced to the room, your credit cards, your bank accounts, and your assets are now locked. The perfect family dream is officially frozen. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The guests, people who had sneered at me for months, turned their backs on Julian. They began to drift toward the stage, not to confront me, but to offer handshakes and business cards. Mrs. Sterling, a prominent banker called out, pushing past a sobbing Julian. I had no idea you were behind Sterling Industries. We must do lunch. I looked over the sea of eager faces, leaving Julian isolated in the center of the cold, empty dance floor. Clear the floor, I commanded, my voice cutting through the murmurs of the stunned crowd. Remove Mr. Thorne and his mother from the VIP area immediately. They are trespassing on private property. 2 security guards stepped forward, flanking Julian and Victoria. Victoria began to shriek, a high-pitched sound of indignation, but I ignored her. My attention was focused solely on the woman sitting quietly in her wheelchair by the DJ booth. Wait, I said, raising a hand. Mrs. Eleanor Thornstays. I walked over to Eleanor and knelt beside her chair, taking her frail hands in mine. They were warm now, no longer ice-cold like they had been in the damp West Wing. Eleanor, I said softly, ignoring the cameras flashing behind me. I have transferred the deed of the Winterbourne estate into a living trust in your name. It is yours again. And do not worry about the bills. Sterling Industries has endowed a fund to cover the maintenance and a 24-hour private medical team. You will never be sedated or locked away again. Eleanor squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Thank you, child. You gave me back my life. Harper. Julian's voice cracked, desperate and pathetic. He broke away from the guard's grip and threw himself onto the floor, crawling toward me on his hands and knees. His tuxedo was disheveled, his hair a mess. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, trying to weaponize the past. Harper, please, remember the lake house. He sobbed, reaching for the hem of my dress. Remember, our first anniversary. You said you would love me through anything, through sickness and health. This is just a sickness I can get better. We can start over. Do not throw us away. I looked down at him. I searched my heart for a flicker of affection, for a spark of the love I had once held so dear. There was nothing. It was like looking at a stranger, or worse, a bad actor reading lines from a script he did not understand. "I remember," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "But the man I loved at the lake house never existed. He was just a costume you wore to trick me." "No, no, I love you," Julian wailed. "I always wanted you. I just wanted us to have more." I leaned down, bringing my face close to his so he could see the absolute finality in my eyes. "You wanted a rich wife like Isabella. You wanted the status and the power," I whispered, letting the words hang in the air. "Congratulations, Julian. You had one. You had a wife worth billions, but you just lost her because you are too cheap." Julian recoiled as if I had struck him. Isabella, who had been watching from the edge of the stage, stepped forward. Her face was flushed with anger, but when she looked at me, there was a grudging respect in her eyes. She walked up to Julian, pulled the massive engagement ring from her finger, the one he had likely bought on credit, and threw it hard. It bounced off his chest and clattered onto the marble floor. "You are repulsive," Isabella spat. Then she looked at me and nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of my victory, before turning on her heel and marching out the door. Before Julian could scramble after the ring, the heavy thud of boots echoed from the main entrance. 4 officers in uniforms emblazoned with the Economic Crimes Division logo marched in. Richard had timed this perfectly. "Julian Thorne," the lead officer barked. "You are under arrest for bank fraud, identity theft, and forgery of legal documents." Julian screamed as they hauled him up and slammed him against the wall to cuff him. No, this is a mistake. My wife can explain. Harper, tell them." I watched them drag him away, his protests fading into the snowy night outside. I expected to feel happy. I expected a rush of triumph, but I only felt a deep, cleansing relief, as if I had finally set down a heavy backpack I had been carrying for miles. The room was quiet now. The guests were dispersing, whispering excitedly about the scandal of the decade. I turned back to Eleanor. A waiter, sensing the moment, brought us 2 glasses of vintage champagne. "To the future," Eleanor said, raising her glass with a steady hand. "No," I smiled, clinking my glass against hers. "To freedom." I stood by the vast bay window, watching the heavy, cleansing snow fall outside. The tiny red lights of the police motorcade carrying Julian into the custody of the Economic Crimes Division were swallowed quickly by the white expanse. Julian was gone. His perfect Christmas dream had dissolved into a nightmare of white noise and swirling flakes. A fresh wave of commotion erupted in the service hall. Victoria, who had revived from her convenient faint, was being escorted by my private security team. She clutched a designer handbag overflowing with trinkets, screaming protests that now held no power. "You cannot do this. This is my house. Where will I go?" Victoria shrieked at the head of security, under the directive of Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, the current owner. The guard stated calmly, "You are required to vacate the premises immediately, taking only personal effects. All other assets are subject to freeze." I watched as the guard held the door open, forcing Victoria out into the blizzard. She was alone, humiliated, and utterly destitute. I turned back to the grand hall, now eerily quiet and scattered with abandoned champagne flutes. I sat down at the long dining table where my place card had been relegated to the end and pulled out my checkbook. A small gathering of reporters still lingered, sensing the final dramatic moment of the saga. I picked up the pen and wrote a check payable to the National Fund for Women Against Economic Abuse. The amount I wrote was $400,000, the exact sum of the lottery winnings I had pretended to win, plus some of the recovered embezzled funds. I held the check up for the cameras. "This money, recovered from the consequences of betrayal, will go to those who need it most," I announced, my voice steady. to help women build lives free from financial manipulation. The final, deeply personal gesture was next. I slipped Julian's cheap engagement ring from my finger. It had looked small and dull when he first gave it to me, a visual symbol of how little he valued me. I placed it gently on the edge of the table, next to Julian's half-empty glass of stale sherry, a monument to a lie. Just then, a man I recognized as a significant institutional investor from New York approached me cautiously. He ignored the police tape still hanging from the stage. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, extending his hand. "An incredible display. We had no idea of your identity. May I ask what the immediate future holds for Sterling Industries?" Any shifts in focus, I stood up, shaking his hand firmly. The transformation was complete. The librarian was gone. The CEO had emerged. "Mr. Davis," I replied, my voice cool and professional. "The focus is expansion, and the immediate plan is cleansing all toxicity from the portfolio. We are moving forward, not looking back." I put on my cashmere coat, a garment heavier than any mink or fur coat, custom-made to my precise measurements. The cold air rushed in from the open doors, but for the first time in my life, the winter chill did not make me shiver. The fire of my satisfied rage had warmed me from the inside out. I said a final farewell to Eleanor, promising to visit, and then I walked out of the Winterbourne Manor. I did not look back at the ornate facade, the gilded cage where I had been held captive. My armored black limousine was waiting. I slipped into the luxurious leather seat and pulled out my phone. I navigated to Julian's contact and pressed the delete button. Vows broken, debts collected, and name cleared. The final thread was cut. I leaned forward and spoke to the driver through the partition. "To the airport," I commanded, settling back into the seat. "I have an empire to run." The car rolled away from the curb, its tires silent on the freshly fallen snow. As we sped down the long, winding drive, the mansion became a shrinking, dark silhouette, leaving behind a ruined legacy and the birth of a legend about the wife who was never to be underestimated. Thank you so much for listening to Harper's incredible revenge story. If you enjoyed this dramatic takedown, let me know where you are tuning in from by dropping a comment below to join the conversation. Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and press the hype button to make sure more people hear this amazing story.